Hello everybody and welcome back to another On the Workbench session. Gonna try a couple of interesting things here. First off, we've got ourselves one of these Mears miniatures. I'm just gonna call it Snake Man. I know there's some completely unpronounceable name that they have for these guys, which is pretty much all of their factions. Just a bunch of vowel and consonant salad, pretty much. Now, I've got some finished ones here. I've got some other pictures of previous ones that I did, but this is the most recent thing. And he's similar enough to this guy. See, we got some weathering here. We've got some non-metallic. We got skin. Similar weapon. So we have enough similarities to this guy that I didn't even have time to actually get pictures of him to throw up on the screen here. Everything is just a little bit more of a rapid fire kind of thing. But I thought it'd be fun to do him. And for the most part, ProAcrylTransparent. So we haven't really focused on these sort of exclusively of late. Actually, I haven't even used them all that much. So much has been done with the other contrast paints and green stuff world. I thought it could be a fun thing just to see, okay, what can these do? Mixing them together, that sort of thing. Now I do have a base here, and hopefully this is going to be dry enough for painting once we get around to it. It's just like the other one. You see, got these little stair step things right here. It's a sculpey base, the usual on a typical Mears miniatures base. There's another figure. So they actually have two sets of these. Well, there's more. This is the monstrous infantry set, and this is they have a set of female ones, and they've got a set of the male ones. You can see the base has a similar thing. We'll try and do some of the cracks on here. This is some of that woodland cynics foliage that I showed you in a recent episode. We're also gonna, I think, use on the Lizard Man team. So mess around with, again, these kind of figures here. See what kind of fun we can have with this, what kind of experiments that we can do. Now I may throw other paints in there, but right now these are the two lighter colors that I got. Of course, the all-powerful faded ultramarine and this bright ivory. Well, mixing it with any of those transparents should give me just about any color that I need. It's not really a limited palette because we have pretty much every color of the rainbow right here. Green, blue, red, yellow, orange, purple. So we're going to go with that. One caveat is also that and this is the commission things, so keep that in mind. The male lizards had to be more of a subdued, more of a grayish type of a tone, and the females had to be more of a brighter type, more saturated. So it's going to be a challenge here. We have to come up with some sort of more saturated tone for this guy. Might be maybe more on the bluish side with hints of purple in some areas. We'll see. Or maybe a very faded red. Something that'll give us some sort of contrast with this armor here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the paint out on the palette, and since we're dealing with the transparent paints, it also means we're going to be doing a lot of glazing, maybe more than you normally see, and maybe more targeted glazing than what you're used to seeing. Because really, if we don't try these different things, it just becomes the same thing all the time. So that could be an interesting little lesson for you, and we're going to get to that next. Let's get moving with these targeted glazes here. Now I talked about a sort of a muted red skin tone. Let's see if we can do that. This is the transparent red. So you can see we're looking obviously transparent. It's so much like the clear red. I bet you even some of the Chimera paints are going to be like this too. So it's still pretty intense even though it's transparent. Now how do we mute this down? A few different ways. We can even spice that in with a little bit of purple there. This is some of the transparent black, and let's see how that grays that down just not without. See if it starts to turn purple. I can either make it warmer like that, Or you can add some transparent green to the palette. Let's just do that right now. Not going to take a whole bunch here, but we'll go like so. I think I just forgot to put that out. And there we go. Again, it's going to have a bit of a purplishness to it because this is kind of a bluish green. But that is, look at that really nifty color right there. We may have to do some transition type things on here. Now there's so much armor on here. That's why I was emphasizing the red. Because really, outside of his tail and his head and his arms, which seem to be devoid of all scales, interestingly enough, well, let's get some of this brown in here too. Now there's another way also to mute this down. I just took some of the faded ultramarine there, and I just took a tiny touch of yellow. That is just an ever so slight touch of yellow. Let's get this, make sure it's on the screen for you. And you can see this is we're gonna focus on an area here as opposed to sort of slapping the glaze all over the place using a makeup sponge. Let's just go straight up with the glaze in this area. Now we're still using the bigger brushes. Still got the big old craft brush going out here. I guess the difference is we're going to be a little more conscious of taking an area like this, and then we end here. I'm going to do the same down here. Now these two, like little ropes here that are holding the skull necklace, whatever that is. If we lose some of those, no big deal. That's not something to worry about. We're also going to have to reflect some of this on the armor, but not too much because this is not shiny chrome. I think that's the other thing too, is you haven't seen me do as many of these. You've seen a lot of the shinier chrome type of metals. You've seen a little bit less of these, what would you say, less polished metals, more just maybe burnished steel. So we're just we'll work ourselves across the tail right now. If I want it to be a little lighter, well, I'm just gonna take some water here. I suppose I could play with the Lamian medium, but for the time being, I just want to stick with water here. And I'm gonna have to turn them at a few weird angles just to be able to get the paint in there, so bear with me. And there will be some times that I have to maybe go over something a second or a third time, because with the way this texture is sculpted, this is very much sculpted by hand. This is not 3D sculpted. There's just a few really obvious ways you can tell the irregularity in the way that the scales are, and some of them are a little bit deeper than others. Whereas if this was a 3D sculpt, and for those of you that have watched the army painting series on the very first one with those Medusa figures, whatever you want to call them, there it was kind of the opposite. There, the digital sculpting meant that we actually had some pretty shallow texture. The texture was way more shallow than, say, as I just redden this up a tiny bit. Again, we're looking for some variety here too. Let's carry this on. And also see this as more of an underlayment. Stuff's going to go on top of this that will be more of just a muted red. I know it looks kind of on the purple side right here, but think of some of those cloaks where there's just so much green in them, and all of a sudden in the shadow areas or the mid-tone areas, then we're throwing blues or reds or something else in there that's not necessarily what you would expect, and that's what's going to happen here. This is also another one of those where we just sort of play around with some colors and see what works. Not so much in the areas of the the armor, because there I have a pretty solid idea what I want to have happen in there, because we have obviously the other examples sitting just right here on the work table to go from. This is another one of those things where it has to look somewhat cohesive with the other ones that have been painted before. I want to say this is maybe the fourth one of the male snakes. I think so. Might be the fifth. I think it's the fourth, because I think these come, especially the monstrous infantry sets, tend to come in batches of 5. Now there is a smaller infantry version of this, more, let's say, just 28 millimeter size, for lack of a better term. And that is the nifty thing about Mirror's Miniatures, is that you'll have the infantry, the monstrous infantry, the really monstrous infantry, and then friggin' huge monsters. And sometimes even more friggin' huge monsters. Or a monster that's being ridden by another monster, which that's kind of wild. That is definitely always interesting to see that. Again, I added a little bit of yellow in there, so it takes it off of the purple and puts it more towards, oh, I want to say this is like a very muted scarlet color or something along those lines. But remember, we talked about reflecting things. Well, here we have to have, just going to do a little bit of just kind of marking here where I think some of that reflection can go. It's going to be painted over by our next layer. That's some of the reasons why it's being done now, because it'll be naturally muted as subsequent layers go over the top of it. Let's darken this down a touch as we get out to the hands here. Like so. These are they're resin figures, and sometimes it can be a little jinky, and that just happens with the Mirror's Miniatures. Maybe the 3D sculpts are not 3D. The digital sculpts maybe have a little less of that. But these can be weird. They can sometimes be a hassle to put together and to deal with. The resin's not always the greatest resin in the world. When you do as many figures as we do, you become a connoisseur of resin, and you start to be able to identify resin with fillers versus pure quality resin. Now, I'm going to take some of that purple, some of this brown here. I'm going to get the interior of the mouth, because the rest of the face, I think, is dry enough to let us play with this here. So brown and purple, probably not a combination a lot of people would think of, but it does yield a pretty nifty intense. See, it's more intense than the color around it. A little on the darker side too. And remember, the face, or the skin as we're going to call it, the scales, those will be lightened up even more as we go along with this. Remember, this is all about glazing in this phase. And I am also going to hit where the eyes are here. So again, we can, and what if we want to do some sort of diamond pattern on them here? We might just do that. That can be fun too. I'm even going to darken this as we get out towards the end of the tail. I don't know why, just started feeling like it, and I'm going to take some even more of that brown touch of the black here, and we'll just let that blend a bit. Yeah, that's pretty fun. I might double down on that here, actually. Go a little bit further down the tail. Sometimes that has as much to do with, I don't know, maybe hiding some oddities and details than anything else. Here we are taking the transparent brown, the transparent green, and a little more of the brown. We're going to get this thing right here. So you can see we made the brown, which is almost kind of an orangey, very intense, what would you say, a burnt sienna. Yeah, burnt sienna, almost over there. And by adding the green, made it more of an umber or Van Dyke brown, cooled it down, darkened it a little bit. Doing that here because I just want that to be a nice little buffer in between where the skin begins over here, the scales, and our metals. And we're going to take this, we are going to carry this across. These guys here, I need to get those to be not primer. Primer, as always, Badger Stynylrez. It was airbrushed on, but like I said, you can brush this stuff on too. You don't have an airbrush, it's no big deal. We used Badger Stynylrez primer for, oh good grief, a whole bunch of years until we finally got airbrushes. I am going to now start to play with, so we got some blue coming in over here. We got water here. We got faded ultramarine over here. That's going to go into this. We got some of our white. Now remember, this is another reason I wanted to play with this, because we've talked a bunch of times about how we use the ProAcryl, the regular paints, because they cover so intensely. Well, the transparent's sort of the opposite of that. And just like with the contrast, where we'd add something like, say, the bright ivory, to make that have a little bit, bitsy bit more contrast. We're going to do that here, but now we got some water coming into this. Let's start to play around with glazes here, and we're going to go with the chest plate like so. And we're going to throw in some more water just where we want to get it a little bit lighter. And all the while I'm going to try and use these little natural, see that little bit of a natural dam right there? Keep going around the front side of this chest plate here. And letting that mix together. Then we take some of that out of our brush. Take some more out of the brush. What are we doing? We are kind of doing what you might do with those makeup sponges, but we're using our nifty little homemade Filbert brush. So see, we already have ourselves a little bit of a nice transition there. Let's go back in here. Move down to this section here. Might even throw a little more of our transparent black in there. What does that do? It's going to give it a little more of a warmish property. Sort of important because in many ways these sections of armor are pointed towards the ground, which typically is going to be more what? It's going to be more brownish. A little bit on the warmer side. Certainly not blue. We're kind of looking for the opposite of sky here. I'll keep going here, and also have to keep in mind we're trying to set up our rust, which means if it's not going to be a cooler color like say those bluish grays, then it's going to also have to be somewhat on the muted side, because the rust colors, well, they're sort of warm orange almost by comparison. Now I can do the same thing here. We'll just take some of the paint out of that. And we'll wipe some of this away. You can do the same with a sponge if you want. You could use a makeup brush. I think that's something that I am going to try to play around with. I have some makeup brushes. I'm going to get some more. Maybe some higher quality ones. But look at what we got here. So remember we were talking about those linear, so it kind of goes a line of chain of highlights here and then a chain of darks over here. Now remember this, we're just going to let that dry. Letting it dry here. Let's get back into, yeah, I'll do the chest plate here. Now you can't see what I'm hitting right here because it's just covered up by his arms. I hope that I can get a brush in there later on because I think you'll get a kick out of what's possible there. Going with some of the, again, some of that transparent black in here. Darkens it down slightly. But you can see how it changes it from the faded ultramarine color. And all the while, what do we always say? That, well, everything's miniature painting is like a chess match. You have to think moves in advance. We're trying to think in advance of our weathering. Trying to think in advance of, well, if we want to put colors that are more of a cyan over this, it's nice to have these kind of tones, the faded ultramarine, some of this as an underlayment. Something that we can play with, who knows, maybe even more saturated colors over the top of it. Going to see if I can do these pieces of shoulder armor here. Now the other stuff is dry. Well, if not completely dry, dry-ish. We'll go with that. I'm also trying to think about, well, the other snakemen and what their armor looked like before this one. So again, we reached over into the black. And because it's transparent, it really is. I know it looks on the palette much more permanent and solid or opaque, I guess. But it's really not. See, we're doing the same thing. We're just sort of sculpting with our paint there. Doing a little paint sculpting. Now let's grab a touch of our faded ultramarine here. Get some into here. The base, the painting of that was really very simple. It was just a couple of the clears, a couple of the liners, mostly brown liner, sepia liner. Then the maiden flash and the maggot white. Yeah, we use those two for the most part to make things lighter. And then went in with the foliage after that. So again, took some of the paint out of the brush. Look at how we're just kind of sculpting this around here. I guess I also wanted to show you. So this is something that, talking about contrast paints, right? So Reaper, clears, liners. We've seen how you can sort of sculpt with paint on those. You can see it can be also done with these clears, and they're also going to dry super matte because, well, that's all. that's basically all colors from the ProAcryl range. They are designed to dry super matte. And that's kind of the deal there. That's what you get. But with the contrast paints, you don't really mess with that so much unless it is sort of maybe a Space Marine shoulder pad, a contained area, a small area. Then you can sort of bop around and play with it, kind of pulling it away like I did there, like this. Probably not the most fantabulous idea. See here, I got sort of squeegee the paint out of there, and then we just take some off. I've played with that with the contrast, and it's possible, like I said, in a smaller area like that, or just working fast. You have to be working fast. If you let it set up at all in any one area, then that is not really something you want to be doing. Now we've got these little sections over here that we're just gonna finish these guys off. And you can see they're pointed at a much different angle than, say, this part of the armor. But this is all just an initial glaze, that's all it is. This is not any kind of permanent thing or a final thing. None whatsoever. Let's now do a little something different for the sword. So you can see it's a very different type of blue here, because maybe this is a bit more on the polished side. So maybe a little more of the sky blue works its way in. Now, here's our, what is this, the transparent brown. Go with a little black. A little touch of that makes it gray. Makes it gray, and then we'll just let some of this mix on its own. I know that is for a lot of folks, it's a hard thing to absorb. That notion of we're just gonna let the paint do some stuff on the miniature. It is controlled. It may seem like it's not controlled. It is just very random. But there's actually a definite logistic behind this. You can see we're taking the transparent black, the transparent brown, and if we're going to have this sword hilt here be any kind of, say, gold type of a thing, or anything along those lines, well, we're starting to set that up here. See, we even took a little bit of the transparent yellow and threw that in there, because why not? Gonna take that same color, we'll just hit the skulls with that. Certainly we'll do more with those, but for now, and we've got some kind of spiny things going on here, sticking out of the two shoulder pads. Now let's get these two guys here. Have something going on them. I've got to get rid of the primer. That's the goal with this, is take away that primer as soon as you can. And that's pretty successfully been taken out of the picture. So no white areas or anything of the sort left to distract us. And I see that actually should be some kind of brown and not a metal color. Speaking of some kind of brown, I'm going to start to do this. So we're trying to take advantage of the transparent paints, right? You've seen me start to play with the contrast paints in this way a little more. You've certainly seen me do it with the Reaper paints, the clear liners, but look at what's happening here. See, there's still plenty of paint on that brush. It is like a wash, but you can see it's unlike what we did to start this, where we were relying on one section of the armor or another to sort of halt the advance of that wash in its place, or whatever you want to call it, the liquid. Well, here there's really no liquid. It's just a brush stroke that happens to have translucent paint on it. It's that same notion of the wet dry brush or the dry wet brush. Sorry, it's late. Since I have not had much sleep whatsoever, kind of this entire week, so you're going to get some of those fun time phrases like that. We're doing it again. Well, here we're going to take some of that away again. Not a dry brush. We're sort of scumbling the paint in there. What are we doing? Kind of creating a horizon line there. Bit of a, look at that. See, we're just kind of scumbling the paint over the top of it. Why? Because we got this big old, basically craft brush. It's pretty darn soft. Yes. Let's do some of that over here. We have a very translucent paint and it allows us to do this. Is every project ideal for this approach? No, not really. Heck, even some of the female type character, the way they're sculpted and such, maybe even those, not so much. But this guy with the armor sculpted the way it is. Now watch what's going to happen here. Think of this as the shaded base coat. Slightly different way of going about it, though. And I know that can scare people sometimes because, well, wait a minute, there's a different way of doing this thing, but it's always done the same way all the time. That is, I try not to let that happen by sort of intentionally pushing things. Now here I had a little bit of wet. Some of the original wash was wet, and I actually did some wet blending there. Completely unexpected. Didn't know that was just going to be sitting there all nice and handy for me like that. So I said, hey, I'm going to use that. Going to use it. So, again, this is something nice and solid that we can play off of in subsequent rounds here. Now we're looking almost 30 minutes in. So I'm just going to do maybe another 5 minutes more in this stage, even though I could, if this was just a straight up me working on it, I wouldn't actually stop and kind of reset things up again. I would just keep blasting right through it. And I would probably be working on one or two others, because those two snakes that you saw, I was working on both of those at the same time. I didn't just take one and nice and neat only do this one thing. That's why I try and show you the army painting series to show you what more is closer to reality, working on multiple things at once. Even with the live sessions, I'm hoping maybe with the oils, if I can do some of those this week, get back into that whole, well, we're not just working on this one thing, we're working on a whole bunch of things at the same time. It's difficult because people want to sometimes just see a regular old lesson out of it. Now here, I'm going to have to just shove this brush in here. You can't see what I'm doing, but it's just necessary to get that in there. We are also now carry some of that down. Can you see? Yeah, you can see that. Just gonna look at that again. Some wet blending. We picked up a little bit of the faded ultramarine that's sitting down there, and we said, hey, let's have some fun with that. Let's have some fun with it over here too. Like I said, the reflections here it's going to be more of a suggestion than, say, on something that has that real chrome, sky earth, non-metallic effect there. Well, I don't want to say exaggerating the effect, but you're taking it to a more full degree. I don't know about that. We're going to go back in here. We've got our transparent brown and black. Again, it's sort of a translucent mix here. We will go now onto our sword blade here, and you can see we're starting to work a little bit on the sky earth effect there. Here, let's get rid of some of that, and then we'll just gently, here, let's get some darker version of this now. A little more. And this side of here we go. I'm looking right in that little triangle well, it's sort of an arc triangle or arc to triangle. Ooh, okay. That'd be an interesting monument. Yeah, how do you do an arch in a triangle? Kind of sounds like the painting pyramid. Going back into the brown mix here. We are going to, the last little endeavor right here is to do something like that. Something like that. Where are we at here? So, again, looking for a suggestion of a horizon line, but not a horizon line. Oh, what are those? Probably trees. Probably trees, and you can see it. We picked up some of the faded ultramarine again, so trying to give this more than just the, well, okay, it's a dark line. That's what I used to do, and by used to, it really wasn't all that long ago. It wasn't until I really started to study those cosplay guys that I talk about all the time now, with the actual armor and such. And that's when I realized, oh, yeah, there's just... it's amazing what you can see reflected in that armor, even when it is not that sort of, well, what would you say? We're going to take a little bit of the purple and black. Oh, you know what? Let's play with some purple and green here. We're always talking about purple and green makes gray. Now that is more of a jade type color. We don't want to get jaded. Well, let's sneak in a little bit of a dark here because that's another prime area for a rust to go. And gonna get some of our transparent black into that, and let's hit the other side real quick. You can see how much darker we can go, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue with deepening some of these glazes, getting the next layer out, because remember, we're taking a little more of a watercolor approach to this, and then we'll go sort of our phase 3. That's going to be where we start to bring in the more opaque, lighter work in the midtones and highlights. So we'll be right back with that. So let's keep glazing here. Now what I'm going to do, I might go a little bit... I'm not going to zoom in closer. I'll just stay where we're at. But what we are going to do is we're going to be even more targeted with some things. So I've got now a craft brush here. It's one of the typical green handle ones, but it's more pristine, has a little bit of a sharper point. Let's play with that. Let's play with that for a bit here. And this way, now I can really start to play here in some of these shadow areas. We also have all these deep cuts. Now, I'm going to say that some of those are going to get some rust effects. But before we get in with that, I want to get some of this darker color. It actually makes the rust effects, I don't want them to stand out too much, but it gives them a little more impact than just if I was to say fill in like this one right here. I just did that. To have this dark in place and then go with the rust down in there almost as a lighter wash, I think it gives a little more 3-dimension to it. Just a little more, I think, anyways. You may think otherwise, and that is just fine. Now here our faux tree line that we're painting a whole little scene. I mean, you could go nuts if you wanted this to be more of the chrome type stuff. You could paint a mountain on here. If this again were mine, and I could just sort of do what I wanted with it, I would be really, really tempted on a huge old surface like that to go a little extra shiny and maybe put something like a mountain on there. I have in the past, I think we did it on the Necron Destroyer, the one that was non-metallic metal. We actually painted a bit of a destroyed city sort of thing looking behind it. pretty sure that's, yeah, I think that's what we did. So yeah, let's get in with a little more dark on the edges. And I think you can look at how far back my hand is on this, by the way. So how am I buttressing my hand? So I got dowel rod like so, and then this is sitting here. And because my fingers are so far back, you'd think, well, I got less control. Well, no, I actually have more control. Look at how gentle that stroke can be. Look at how I can do it. Look at this big old arc that I can do real small. Look at this. Not so much. This is so darn tight. Look at that. It's completely ham-fisted. Nothing I can do there. So these are the little things I try to bring in. I think it's hard to do those on, like something like this. There's things that I may not be able to just do all of it on here, because otherwise it starts to become pretty long. And there are some other tutorials that I've been filming where, yeah, I wish it could be a 3-part series, but it can't necessarily be a 3-part, so some of these are the larger scale 75 mils. There's a bunch of those coming up, that's for sure. Bunch of those coming up. But these commission things, you know how it was with the sort of Gasland type vehicles. Remember the Gem Dragons? All of those are commission things, and we had to deal with the limitations and restrictions of those commission pieces. Now, some of you just, that's not what you do. You only paint for yourself, and well, that's hey, that's great. There's no problem there. But I know there's folks that either want to get into this or are thinking about it. And if they're thinking about it, and I can just sort of introduce them to these ideas, because if you haven't done something before, how do you know? How do you know what it's going to be like working in a certain industry or whatever if you really haven't done that? And then there's folks that sort of do it, but it's really on a local game store basis, which, unless you have a local game store that has hundreds of new people cycling through it all the time, you can only squeeze so many commission pieces out of said game store, and you'll have to go beyond that. And that just mostly terrifies people. We are going to continue with brown, but I'm going to throw a little green in there. What the heck? Because reasons. Just, we'll do that. Just want to make sure you can see where this is going here. And we're getting into some decent darks here. And then what happens is this is something that we can play with it when we do the rust. So we have, again, more of these sort of cuts and chips out of the armor here. Those are some pretty large rivets. Those are decent sized rivets right there. And some of these are so deep, it takes more than one shot to try and get the paint down in there. So again, see, brush is just kind of cradled in my hand. Everything's supported. And to be honest, I wish I could do more things on dowel rods like this, because look at what I can do here. Now, if this was on his base, I'd have to be holding the base. It would be really difficult. The problem is, being on a dowel rod, it can make other aspects of filming more difficult, especially when it comes to army painting. Really, when it comes to army painting. Because, well, I think now maybe there'll be some more room in my filming area. I have done some subtle changes to that. Yeah, see, this has all been glazes. Yeah, we mixed a little bit of opaque with our, I almost said maggot white, our faded ultramarine. Boy, the faded ultramarine would have been displeased at that. Does not like to be called another name. Does not want its name taken in vain. Now I'm going to go touch a yellow and a little more of the transparent yellow in there. Where are we at? You can see it. Just to throw that into here. Those are just going to be some sort of rope, I guess. Do a little more here. And we can even use the transparent paints here to make our rust for sure. I'll probably bring out the transparent orange, I think. Somehow that got left behind. See, I'm already tempted. Look at this. I'm already tempted to start playing with it. We have kind of a semi. Oh, if this was the secret weapon rust, it would be either old rust. Yeah, this would be probably secret weapon old rust. Eventually, I'm going to get myself a restock on the secret weapons. If you're wondering why I haven't seen as much secret weapon paint on these, it's not that I don't use it. It's just, it's mostly used up because, well, we like it. And when you like something, you tend to use it up. So that, if you're wondering where that's been, oh, we still have it. So now I'm going to throw a little bit of that purple into here and let's see what we can do. We're going to play with some darks on the face. Remember what we did on the tail here? We are going to do that, or especially around the eyes. Especially around the eyes to make those stand out. But now, I'm going to throw a little of our black in there. This is also where I can experiment with some form of maybe some kind of marking. I don't know. Let's see what happens here. Because I see there's a little diamond shape here. That makes me wonder, should I play around with that? I'm going to make that darker there. So again, the black gonna go, yeah, red. Touch of that brown so it doesn't get too much towards the purple. I think that has some focus on it. And now, let's see what we can do here. A suggestion of a pattern, not necessarily we're going to count out these scales. We are precisely going to execute a diamond-shaped pattern. That's not necessarily what we're looking to do here. Don't know what size I want these diamonds to be as they work their way down, because typically something like a diamond pattern like this, it would shrink in size obviously as you get towards the end of the tail, because the tail just sort of, well, shrinks in size. You also have to ask the question, do you follow, now we talked about counting the scales there, well, do you actually just follow, okay, we go from sort of a 7 scale diamond down to a 5, down to a 4, down to a 3. And then I'm starting to think, you know what, I'll just go with more of the, bring dark down here. It simplifies this a little more here. Sometimes simple is better, especially in a part that you do not necessarily want to emphasize. What we are going to emphasize is maybe a purple tongue on this guy. Some of the other ones have pink tongues. But I think that'll create a nice difference from the... Because if I do it on the pink side, it's going to be an awful lot like what we've just done here. So doing this sort of translucent, transparent stuff, what it does is also going to save, it does save time in the end. Where are we at here? Just gonna throw a hint of pattern out here. Nowhere near as specific. Because remember, we're gonna be going back into this with lighter tones. We are gonna get a little more shading and reinforcement down into here. So that when we go back in with lighter colors, yeah, we needed that there. And now speaking of darks, it's sort of like this idea. It makes that typical lighter chest sort of thing, but without necessarily having to make the chest lighter. Let's do some on the hands. You know what? Maybe the hands should just be. At least these shadow parts on these fingers should be darker now. The fingers are kind of on the rough side, I have to say. It's not really the smoothest sculpting / casting on the hands that you've ever seen. And it's not the only time I've ever seen this. I forget what the name of it was. Was it Warzone or something like that? It was another company. This is way back 10-ish, yeah, maybe more like 8-9 years ago, and their stuff would look super amazing when it was painted and everybody loved it, but assembling it was weird. And the details, while they maybe knew, okay, they knew how to sculpt a horse as far as making it look somewhat realistic, it was rough. The sculpting was accurate but rough, I guess you can call it that. So sometimes you get that with the Mears miniatures, where it's some really nifty sculpting, and then when it comes out, it can be a little bit rough in some places. Now I am going to go just real quick into, where's my blue over here? So this is still on the translucent side of things, but it is also lighter. There. I just wanna, here, I'm gonna get some of that fade. You can see how, look at how potent that is already. That really has some oomph to it. It's that opaque, and we're still, I mean, there's water in this. You still have the transparent paints in there, but yet it's already, it's trying to make itself known. Look at this. And we're gonna see how thin that is, but yet, wow, it really wants to cover. But here we go. So now we're doing a little bit of that. Remember, we were talking about the dry glazing there? We're doing a little bit of that here. So it is still, so we're still in that glazing phase, and it looks like this is the other disadvantage of doing things on the dowel rod. So I think when he got caught on the palette camera, that sort of popped him on the dowel rod there. So I may have to give him some glue and let that dry. You can see we're just starting to think about, okay, where's our light gonna come from? Here, let's get rid of some more of this. And do that an even softer edge right there. Even this brush, this is the one that was more pristine, as I make the air quotes with my hands that I can't do because my hands are full. Here, one more area that's important there. Gonna hit some, Just to lighten that up now, let's get some of the armor here. And it really is, it's almost like we're still glazing. But remember, and I brought this up in a few other tutorials before, that glazing is not just making things darker. I'll never forget when we first sort of discovered that, yeah, glazes can be lighter. They don't have to be a darker color to be a glaze. That was very powerful, discovering that, because it sort of led to stuff like this. Made it a whole lot easier to do stuff like this. Yeah, this is still practically a glaze. I think you'll see it a little bit better here. Let's see, it's a lighter. It's every bit as transparent as what we tried to do before. Now it's a little bit less on the transparent side, just the nature of the ProAcryls. Let's say if I was using the Reaper liner and clear paints, it would be easier even to do a semi-translucent effect. I think too, even with the contrast paints, it would be. And this is why, and it's something I'm probably going to just keep saying again and again and again in every freaking episode, is you just don't need entire paint lines. Kathy and I, we've started to talk about this just amongst ourselves more and more. What is the reason, the logic behind wanting entire paint lines? There's the collector's mentality. You know, if you have it all, there's a certain just fulfillment that goes with that, I suppose. There's that. Then we thought, well, maybe there's that I don't want to be missing something. You know, you see other people on Facebook or whatever random social media thing talking about such and such a paint, and oh look, I just got this complete set. And maybe there's a mentality that having that complete set is going to lead you to the promised land. And then you realize that at least a full third of the colors, you never ever even touch them. Because sometimes matching paint to projects, not a bad idea. Now, of course, for me, there is no such thing because, well, I could just use the same 7 or 8 oil paints or the same 10 acrylic paints or whatever for every project. I don't care. I don't need special paints for every project. I'd rather just mix them myself, and then that's just, I'm good to go. Like right here, how many paint colors do we need to produce all of this wild, interesting color right here? You know, all these transitions, neat stuff happening. And heck, even here, not necessarily painting in the same way that you've seen me paint so much, especially of late, I suppose. This is probably really new for you guys. And I haven't even gone anywhere near that ivory stuff either. There's a long, long ways to go yet with that ivory. Now, I don't want to play around too much with this. And I suppose the other thing, too, I want to bring up, yeah, I have not said, well, okay, we're now in the phase where we work on the metallics, or the non-metal metallic parts. You know, I'm trying to reinforce that notion of, well, we're working on the whole thing all at once. We're not just saying, well, now we'll work on this one isolated bit. That's not how it works. That's not what I want to encourage people to do. That is definitely not what I want to promote at all. What I want to promote is people working on the entire thing, just treating every surface not only at the same level of importance, but just same level of urgency. You know, that's why you gotta get to that face, because that face is your center of interest. You better get that done first. Well, sometimes setting up the areas around the face first is a better idea. Because if you just go hog wild on the face, you never know. Well, okay, now I've made it impossible to have any interest anywhere else by what I've done with the face. So that's pretty nifty with the metals there. Let's start to play a little bit here. Since we're going more into the opaque stuff here, let's touch of that yellow to make sure it doesn't get too pink. Looking to mess around here on the arms real quick. So this is the same thing. We don't want to get those metals get too developed and then have nothing going on with the skin here. I'll continue with this. Oh, let's see what we want to do with his hands. Or fingers, I suppose. So I think, who knows, maybe lighter here is better. I also have to think, because the sculpting here, this is another area where things are a little bit on the rougher side. They're not super smooth or whatever you want to call it. The sculpting is a bit more rough. That can also change how you're going to approach things. So let's say you got, was that Reaper Bone stuff, where the casting may not be quite so clean as what you would expect on some other figures. And when I work on those dark sword things, you can expect some pretty precise details to be sculpted on every part of it, whether it's the fingers, the face, the hair. It's the nature of that miniature line. That's pretty much what that's all that line is all about. But not every company is the same. So you can see we're even on the right here, we're hitting some of these with some lighter tones. It doesn't have to be anything precise just yet. We're trying to figure out, okay, what is going to be the lightest point of the skin here? Just how light do we go with that? Can always go back in with some glazes. I'm trying to magnify the presence of those diamonds a bit. It's that sort of negative painting. Yeah, it's just the suggestion of those diamonds being there rather than making it real super obvious that they're there. And let's get a touch more of my red into this. Yellow to tone that down. And then here, let's see what we want to do with these guys. Gonna just stay away again from the white. We want to give ourselves plenty of room to operate here. All the while trying to keep in mind, see if I make it too warm, too much towards the orange or whatever, then the rust doesn't get to enjoy quite as much of a moment in the sun because it's your eye is just comparing it to the skin tone there. Well, and then the skin tone doesn't stand out quite so much because now it's, well, we just sort of took the rust and matched it. It's just, I'm gonna go in with some of this. Gotta see what teeth look like here. And this is not the final color of the teeth. I just need something lighter to, it's a visual, something I can compare here. Oh, I'm gonna take some of the faded ultramarine. We'll drop some lights on these skulls over here. What else am I gonna... Yeah, let's do something right here. Make that stand out maybe a little bit more. I'm gonna have to definitely throw out some more of my transparent brown because it's basically gone. Yeah, doing some more of these transparent things. The difference is it's lighter. Oh, look at what we're doing here. We're doing the same thing now on the armor. It's all very transparent, not a dry brush. I mean, I can see the water sort of glistening on this. So again, not a dry brush. Look at that right there. Same. See, look at that. Starting to give it a little bit of an earth tone on the underside of the blade. Again, just letting myself having a little fun here too, I gotta say. And to me, I know most people just kind of freak out with the whole non-metallic metal thing, and for me, that is sort of a zen relaxing exercise there because I can just ponder the environment, hey, and try and put that onto the figure. So I went with some of that ivory there. It does a couple of things. It lightens it up. It also makes it more opaque. But yet we're still transparent enough. I would still consider this a semi-glaze. Still a bit of a glaze, even at this point. But right now, what I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to try and glue him back onto his dowel rod here because he got sort of hooked onto the pallet cam with his crazy weapon sticking out there, and that got loose, and I don't want him spinning around at a crucial stage because we actually are starting to get down to some more precise details. Now, speaking of metals, what we'll do is, we're going to start to play more in the midtones, and I think that's where we are going to throw some rust in the metal. So we're going to play with some lighter colors here and then see if we can then get to the rust on our metals here, and we'll do that next. We're going to work more on our midtones and even some of our lights. We're also going to play around with a bit of right here in this area. Start to make some suggestions of things that could be gold here. That sword hilt, maybe the trim on these. If I like it, it stays. If I don't like it, it goes. And at a certain point here, I also have to remember to bring out the orange, although you add a little bit of red to that yellow, and you kind of are getting the same thing. I guess the reason I'm shying away from that is if we're doing all the rust, and we're going to add a lot of orange to it anyway, how much is that really going to stand out? So we're going to go a little bit minimize that, I would say. I will start to employ the ivory a tad bit more, and again, that's the ProAcryl. That's the more the regular type paint. So you are looking at something that has just much more opacity to it. I'm actually gonna make sure I get a little bit of something that's not quite so yellow here on these skulls. We're even gonna go in, just grabbed a little bit of the faded ultramarine there. I don't want these skulls to get too bright, especially with the armor right in behind them. What else are we gonna... I'm just gonna real quick hit that. I'm going to real quick just get some lighter color on these eyes. They will most likely be some sort of maybe jade green, something like that. It'll stand out pretty well from the rest of the skin tone. Now let's play with some purple here. See what happens. Just the slightest bit of light added to that really changes it around. This is the same thing as when we take our clear Reaper clears and then add something like the maggot white or the maiden flesh. Even gonna maybe get some of that purple into the gums here. I'm actually gonna use now faded ultramarine with the purple, so we have this cool down, so it stands out from the reddishness in the face. Yeah, that'll stand out. That will not blend in. And I'm trying not to also pop this thing off of my dowel rod here, like what happened the last time. So if you see me moving a little bit more cautiously with that, I suppose it's the upside and downside all at once. The dowel rod is fantastic, but it also can sometimes lead to smashing into the palette camera more. Now let's see if we can't. You know how much I love to work things like purple and such into things like metal and sword blades. We're going to do that here. I'm going to suggest a little bit of that over here too, crazy as that sounds. I know it seems like madness, but it really does add something to your metals. Really does. Just have to be, I'd say, willing to take a chance. But it is kind of that way. Sometimes you have to be a little more bold and brave with your color choices if you want to do something new and different. And it applies to, what would you say, the contest painting as much as it does to the army painting side of things, because, and I know there is definitely what would you say, a push towards not really taking a chance when it comes to contest figures. Oh no, this is outside the norm. I won't win if I do this. Oh, let's say fine, you don't win the contest. Whatever. What are you achieving just yourself? And if you're kind of doing the both, well, let's say about the commission things. Well, that's great. You can win those awards. Awards do not translate to commission things. It doesn't necessarily work that way, or it doesn't mean someone will necessarily pay you more, because unless you're finding the right buyers that have the right income source, you can have all the awards you want. And I'm just bringing this up because this is ostensibly about commission painting here. You can have all the shiny trophies you want, and people say, yeah, that's fantastic. But they don't necessarily, doesn't mean they have any more money to give you. So I don't know. There is definitely a part of me that sometimes the reasons why people are approaching the painting contest and what is it they're trying to get out of them sometimes is not always the most healthy thing that they're trying to get out of them. There's a little purple tongue, and if I do some preaching here, you'll just have to forgive me, because it's another one of those things where I talk about the army painting and people get frustrated and they end up just not painting miniatures at all. And well, I've seen it too with the contest side of thing and the commission side of things. I see people, the burnout thing, that's kind of a too generic of a term. That's overused too much. But let's say they just get frustrated with it. They don't achieve what it is they thought they were going to achieve, or not quickly enough, or whatever. And there's people that could really have a lot of potential with the painting and can do a lot of things, but yet they just sort of fall away because expectations. Sometimes managing expectations is important. Just dusting a little bit of this sort of pink color in a few places. Now we're gonna go. I have to throw out some more of my transparent black here, but we're looking for a little bit of purple into this here. Yeah, there we go. Just snuck a little bit in. I'll sneak a little bit in over here too. Again, that's very transparent in the way that's being done. I'll use my finger even to blend that in some areas. And now we have done plenty with the faded ultramarine, and then what was it? Some of our transparent blue here, but what we're going to do is retain a little bit of this. It's sort of like the transparent version of jade, and that's the ProAcryl jade that we all, well, at least a lot of us really enjoy. But this is what I'm looking to make, and I'll bring it out here in a second. Just give me a second. We're going to make put this out in a few different places. We are making something along the lines of this mint green right here. This is why I say you don't always have to have that particular color, because we're making that color right now. This is going to have a little more opacity to it than the usual mint green. I see I actually have to also go lighter with it, so we are gonna. Now that means it's going to be that much more intense here. I suppose I could say fool around with the Lamian medium here, but I'm trying to just go straight up with what I've got and see where does that take me. It's an experiment. Those other two that you saw, the other two snake people, that was all painted in the very traditional clear liners. I'm doing this sort of on purpose. I'm just trying to emphasize a point here that if you can just do some simple calculations in your mixing and that sort of stuff, that it opens up a host of freedom for you, where you're not necessarily imprisoned by the paint that you have or that's available to you or that you can afford. All of those things. All that stuff. So let's just keep playing around here. I think you can see, remember we talk about those chain of lights and the light, dark, light, those striations that work their way in. You see it all the time on metal, especially here because you got sort of a thing that's facing upwards here, so maybe a little more of the sky blue in there. Also doing a scumbling style brushstroke there. Here, not trying to get too much of a harsh horizon line difference here. Not like things that we've done in the past, but it almost looks like you're seeing soldiers or something that are running away, or other guys that are in his war band or something. And remember we talked about the faded ultramarine and the other more muted stuff that's underneath this. That was that. We're setting it up. Though those things, the underpainting, whatever it is, term that you're comfortable labeling it. Here, let's really hit this. And see that we've got dark now. Or light, because we had enough dark in the beginning there to really help us out. We're going to extend our sky blue color here a bit, then we're going to scumble that around. See, some of what's underneath is still, you can still see it, still shows through. We're going to do that here. We're using the brush more like that filbert brush that we talk about all the time. Now I don't have, unfortunately, the Mountainsmen here to show you their chest armor and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit similar to the armor on these guys. I'm trying to find, I think the Stormcast Eternals are probably the best equivalent that have that sort of armor plating on them. And I've been prepping a bunch of those for oils, for a bunch of different things. I think we'll be able to do some exercises with those. Again, dark, light, dark, kind of thinking the same thing here like we did before. Remember, armor reflecting onto itself. But then also remembering we want to do a little bit of the rust effects here because of all these chips and cuts in the armor. You can see there's also some cross-hatching to the brush strokes here. A little bit of cross-hatching. What's that for? That's because this texture is kind of rough. There is a definite, and there's lots of pock marks in this. Very, I guess, battle-worn, you could say. And I'm trying to emphasize that here. See how that starts to smooth itself out? Sometimes what you got to do is you place your color and then you smooth the edges around it. Maybe it's something I learned back in the days of photo retouching. I don't know. But sometimes that's what you have to do is you place a color and then you kind of work at the edges around it. That's what we did an awful lot back in the day. Now here we're really lightening this up. Now I don't know. There we go. I think it caught the camera lights or my LED lights in a certain way and that sort of burned that out. I think you can see it here. It's going to be tough. It's kind of pointed in a weird way for me to keep working on it, but needless to say, we're hanging on to, see, look what that starts to do for us here. Again, this is the ivory. It's still not a straight up white. And you can see how much lighter I can still go here. But this is that point where we start to say, okay, center of interest, where is that actually focused? And then sort of build accordingly. Like on the teeth here, we can go back over those, but I wanted to sort of mark a few lighter areas on that, and we're going to do the same here. Thinking of building up that sort of ridge line. Now these lines you can't really see because you are blocked by the arm and the sword and such things. Now you'll be able to see what we're doing here. So again, these are not continuous. They're interrupted. They're broken because, well, look at all the chips and cuts and everything that's going on here. I think maybe as you see this texture, you start to realize, well, yeah, that's why he's breaking up these highlights the way he is, allowing some of this texture to show through. I think you can really get a good peek at it here. Just letting this brush slide across it. It's sort of an edge highlight until it's not, because then we start working in other areas here. It's that same notion of just don't let yourself get drawn into one area. Up here we are going to play with this a bit. And once again, I don't want to say like it's some kind of hammered steel, but some kind of definitely beat up steel. Like it was pristine at some point, but it ain't pristine anymore. Not quite so pristine. But again, we're doing this scumbling thing. Remember I mentioned what was that, the makeup brushes there? Because there's the stippling technique that's all super popular and everything. And I'll see if I can find some stuff where we can play with that. And by we, I suppose me. But I haven't really. I suppose I've, in a way, tried a version of it before, just by default, sort of, in the ways that I work on things. But maybe if we just specifically say, okay, we're gonna try doing that sort of dry brush technique, for lack of a better term. Because we haven't really done that whatsoever here. And I'm just gonna think about what would be a good opportunity for that. Is it a vehicle? A vehicle would be the easiest notion for something like that. You see it all the time. Or a larger scale figure. Some kind of 75 mil thing. So those are sort of the targets that I have for that. See how we're just starting to think about, okay, let's lighten up a few areas here and there. Let's not forget the sword where we really need to get in. This is where we use the maggot white and mint green an awful lot, and especially look at this here. Remember, we're going up against our purple. This is another way we're getting some interest on this blade here, but it's not just white. We're not just adding rounds of white onto this. It's an actual color. It's actually got a color to it. Oh, what else are we doing here? I'm just needed to check my time there because again, I have to keep this to a certain length. And I may get to painting the base, or they're just gonna, because I was gonna use the transparent on it. I'm not gonna get into the foliage. You've either seen it on things, or you have an opportunity to see it on other tutorials that I'm gonna be doing. We're gonna take some of that transparent brown now, mix it with that. Gives it a little touch of a greenish. Yeah, that's a pretty nifty hue right there. So in many ways, it starts to feel like I'm working with the clear paints and that sort of thing, but I have to always think, well, there's going to be more opacity to this because of the light colors that I'm mixing in. And that's going on right now. So things are a little more opaque than what I would normally expect them to be. But we're also going to see, now we're taking this, and this is going to be, we worked all that dark into there. Now we can start to play around with some midtones and some lights that aren't necessarily that sky color. Especially here, say along the side of the shoulder pad. Again, we're scumbling this on there. This is probably something that you would see in one of those videos I'm talking about, where it's more of a, well, de facto dry brush approach. And like I said, I've thought about it for quite a while. I think people have even asked me about it. But I couldn't think of necessarily a project for, or a real reason to try that. And now I think there is now, because we've got some things to compare it to. Once again, I'm looking to do dark, light, dark. Here, let's put some of this light right in here. So can you see it? Yeah, see that neat little sort of striation that happens there. Why? I don't know. It seemed like it needed to be there. I needed to break up all that space. Yeah, you'll probably see me doing a lot of finger blending in those episodes, I would say. This is very similar. This kind of scumbling here. Think of it as a preview then, I guess. Think of what we're doing here as sort of a preview. Geez, I don't know. Am I really going to need the makeup sponges? They're not makeup sponges, or the makeup brushes. I have some around somewhere. And I'll try and maybe get some more. See what we can do. Now let's lighten this up a touch too. We've been playing way more in the mid ranges of that. Let's do a bit more here. So I think what we are going to do then, we are not going to mess with our rust in this phase. What we'll maybe do is kind of in that final painting phase, but we'll work on the rust and then maybe do whatever semi-final things I can do on the face. But also I want to be able to paint that base for you using these transparent colors, so much like what we would do at, say, brown liner, sepia liner, those things. I think that's a little bit more valuable to you than just seeing me add final highlights to the skin or whatever. But here, once again, see how we're doing a little line of lights here, because we added a little bit more of the ivory, or bright ivory, I think it is. Okay, and we're just gonna, we'll dot this up here. Same thing over here. We're just gonna, because there's an arc here of not a whole lot. Now again, we're gonna have the rust in there too. But I think I'm gonna minimize it, not quite so much as what you saw on the other example piece. We may not go quite so heavy on it there. Where is the areas? You can see we have a lot of. We'll maybe go with about that much. Let's see just how close we get to that. Now let's hit some bright lights. I'm gonna just hold on to him. It's another good way of not popping him off of the dowel rod here. And you can see how much more room I had to work with here. See how much lighter I can go with. And again, that's just bright ivory. That's not even, say, a titanium white. It could be lighter than that, believe it or not. I'll get the top of that, so look at how much lighter I can go. I think it even shows up on camera. Sometimes the lightest lights don't necessarily show up on camera. Yeah, let's pop some of those into here. Oh, what the heck, I might just, because we are on the upper surfaces here, see, look at this. It's a stippling type thing. I know there's a lot of the long smooth brush strokes, and I talk about that an awful lot on my stuff too. But the texture of the situation demands a little bit different approach. Let's hit that over here too. Again, I'm just going for a certain portion of it, and that's it. Go back over here. We'll pop a few of these. Now the other thing too is I want to see what happens with the rust effects that I add, because that will alter too what I do, maybe with some extra additional darks or things on the face or something on the skin somewhere else. Yeah, so see, now we've got some bright juicy highlights in there. I've got my green here. Do I have enough? Yeah, I've got some yellow to play with, so we're just gonna make a nice intense green here to throw into the eyes. Let's get some yellow into that, and some more of our white. When that dries, then I can go in there and sort of do my little eye slit there and some other refinements. See, I even picked up a little bit of blue into that. Don't really care. Now I'm going to try and get a few areas here. Not all this same color. I will go in with something that maybe has a little more yellow in it too, but we're just trying to see maybe a few areas on the arms there. Same thing along here. Now I could, if I really wanted to go extreme, I could almost treat the scales more like something that's metal and do that same sort of light, dark, light, that sort of chain of lights there, but not gonna emphasize that so much here. I haven't been doing it on the other ones, and I do want these to, at least, even though they're different colors, still sort of look like they belong together. Here, let's get that eye ridge there. We'll lighten up this. It'll hopefully make the purple tongue stand out a little bit more too. There we go. Again, drop in a few lights onto the arm here, a few lights onto the hands. So what we're going to do then, we're going to throw maybe some transparent orange out on the thing. We'll get some more of the transparent brown. What we'll do is we'll see just how effective these different transparents can be in creating that rust effect. Yeah, so we'll be right back with that. We're going to do the rust on the armor, but before we get to that, I want to at least throw a few layers of glazes here on our base. And we'll keep it simple. We got the transparent brown and black out there. And we're going to use probably some of the faded ultramarine blue here and there to sort of match what we did on those other bases that I showed you in the last segment. So let's see, we're going to grab a touch of our transparent black here. Okay, mix it with the brown, with the green. And we'll start out doing what is going to be the dirt. I don't have to get terribly elaborate with that because there's so much of either the static grass tufts, the foliage tufts, whatever there's going to be, that's going to cover up so much of it. I'm not going to go too crazy with, I might just a little bit of red there, something like that, just to make it a little bit different. Gonna get around my edge here real quick because that's so light, it's gonna throw off everything else that I do. But I'll at least just kind of hide that a bit. Here, let's go some more. Just like I said, hiding that edge as best as I can. Now we'll grab a little bit of white and right away you see it's not going to look quite so bright on camera anymore. How's about that? Knocks all that down. I know it's going to be a little bit on the shiny side, at least for a while here, but now we've got that surface covered. Let's go back in here with maybe some lighter colors. And once again, we've got that sort of semi-filbert brush going here. If I hold it at this angle, like so, and I know this looks a little crazy to some folks. You've got the brush strokes in there. Well, that helps give it sort of a stained look, basically. It's very wet in the wet. You don't have to do it this way. Say it all the time. You don't have to do everything that I do, or every single material, or every single approach. You do just what you think is going to work best for you, what you're going to be able to incorporate into your own stuff. I will get some of that in here too. See, we just kind of use the side of the brush there like we did before. You can see how much paint is in that brush. Now, if this were, let's say, the maiden flesh, some of the Reaper stuff, it wouldn't be covering quite so much, because remember, you go with the regular ProAcryls, you're going to have quite a bit of coverage. So what we'll do now is just going to let that dry for a bit. I'm going to set it off to the side here. Now let's play with some of that rust. Now I did grab, this is the last of the transparents that you haven't seen me throw out on the palette yet. Transparent orange, it's sitting right over there. You can see me pointing to that. I'm going to go back to our bigger brush over here. We'll mix up a few things. We've got our transparent brown. The idea, the first thing I want to try to make is something that's along the lines of the Secret Weapon Old Rust. Typically old rust, red rust, then orange rust. Secret Weapon even has the yellow rust, and you've seen me using that on vehicles, but for right now we're trying to basically make, I actually throw a touch of red into here. So this is pretty, it's closer to red rust than old rust. I think if I throw a little bit of this green, yeah, throwing a little bit of the green in there now, that's getting it to be more like the old rust. We are also throwing some water in there, and let's play with it now. Yeah, we definitely got ourselves pretty close to what would be, again, an equivalent of the Secret Weapon Old Rust. I'm going to move this water off of the palette here because I need some space, because we are doing this in a glazing style. Remember, that's very much what you do with the Secret Weapon weathering paints when you're doing the rust stuff. And we're going to do that here. So again, I'm going to wipe some of the paint out of the brush, and see we're starting to push that around here. pushing it down into those crevices. But as always, you go too heavy on the rust, you're kind of asking for, you don't want to just push it too much. More can be less. Especially here where you've got these sort of like a, I don't want to say a strap, but some kind of a piece there that was probably slapped there to try and keep those two pieces of armor from coming apart too much, or some sort of a patch. So see, I watered it down even more. This is the kind of stuff you can do with the secret weapon weathering paints too. They are designed to work in a very much a watercolor style. In effect, I wanted to see, could you do a similar thing with these transparents? Because let's say, once again, it's harder for you to get the secret weapon paints. If it is, well, then these, but now you have to mix a whole bunch of stuff together. That's sort of the downside. Is with the secret weapon paints, you just take the old rust or the red rust and you're good to go. Here you have to get to those colors, and then you can start to do the stuff that all this sort of transparent, translucent type work that we're doing here now. And you can see, as always, the rust focuses on areas that, well, where the water or something along those lines would tend to congregate. Don't necessarily want to do rust streaks. It's always super tempting to do that on shields or even on armor, Space Marines, whatever. It's a natural thing because it's a neat effect. Looks really neat. The only problem is when you do the streaks, you're basically indicating, much like the Tin Man, whoever this dude is has been standing in the rain or the weather for a heck of a long time, not moving. Conveniently just standing still right there, allowing everything to get rusty, and then have those streaks. So that's probably something as fun as those are to do. Now, of course, there's not lots of, well, I'm assuming snake men walking around with big old swords in their hands, and most snakes don't have hands. At least not most of the snakes that I've seen. You know, there's Australia, they got weird critters there. But I think even there, the snakes do not have hands. They might punch you, but maybe not with hands. I don't know. So I can even wipe some of that away. I also don't want to kill too much of. See, I've got the reflections there of the red on from the skin and the scales. I don't want to lose that too much to this rust, so we're going to go minimum on this. Much more so than the other one, which didn't really have as much opportunities for, well, stuff like this, with all those neat different colors arrayed. That's why you can't necessarily, even though they're supposed to be from the same quote-unquote army or whatever, sometimes you just have to do things a little bit different from one to the next. So again, working on moving our rust around here. Now let's get a little more of our transparent orange in here. Let's take this a little lighter here. And at a certain point, this is probably going to need something opaque in it. Because with those lighter layers of rust, that's where it's fun. You start out with these darker layers of rust, and then you sort of, it's sort of the reverse than what you're doing with, say, just the regular metal parts. You see how we're working darker here, but then it's kind of fun sometimes to have that lighter rust, especially. I'm just looking to see if you can see that. So let's, yeah, we'll get some of that here. Remember the vehicles that we did? I know they're not necessarily Gasland's scale, but in effect that's kind of what they were. but where you have sort of the most rust sort of collecting in one spot, it's kind of fun to have that be lighter. So what I'll probably do is, well, maybe I can, oh, what the heck, we'll just see if we can do that with the ivory alone. And see if we can make that work. It may not work, and that's all good. But you can see where this is tending to collect here in all of these edges. So I think we have a pretty nice base as far as the darker action in the rust goes. Yeah, we've got it. See how that's starting to get kind of an orange-ish tint. Here we'll go around this. But now we need to go another step lighter on this. So let's do that. See if we can make this work. So we've got our that's coming pretty close. Now I'm tempted to throw a little yellow in there, but we'll go with this. Let's see what we got here. Let's water that down. And I think he's on screen, and yeah, but it's still translucent. That's the cool thing. Yeah, that's about what I was looking for. This is pretty much what I was hoping to end up with as far as this lighter rust color goes. Gonna go around that rivet there. So we basically, what is that phrase? If you want to have light, you must have dark, and vice versa. Well, if we wanted this lighter rust to look like it had any kind of an impact, we had to go darker first. And now we can take advantage of what we did with the darker rust right here along, look at this, right around our rivets or whatever those are supposed to be. I'm not quite sure. Now let's grab our other guy, and as you can see, pretty darn close. And that was all done. The other one, like I said, that was all done with the Reaper liners and clears. Probably took the, well, just like I did here, the brown liner, some of the red liner, some of the clear orange, and the combination of those, and well, they're liners and clears, so they would have a bit of transparency just like what we got here. And voila, we were able to do that lighter rust. So maybe it would be fun to, I've got tons of vehicles, World War II vehicles that I have to get done. I have a whole bunch of T-34s and such, and what we can do is see, we'll do some in oils, do some with the transparent here, some more with the classic secret weapon paints and the Reaper paints. Nothing like an experiment where you try the same thing with different materials to see, is it easier to get that same effect with one or the other. Now, if you have access to all of the different materials, well then, now it's more a choice based on cost, or maybe just preference on how does the stuff just sort of feel in your hand to use. Because there are some paints that just, maybe they don't suit your style necessarily, and that's okay, because I think that just happens to all of us. I think there's just certain things, either we work a certain way, a material that works for one person, it's not guaranteed that it's going to work for everybody. And I don't mean, oils work for one person but not for another. It could be maybe some people, they don't actually like the oil brushers, or the other way around. They say, oh yeah, those oil brushers are great, But man, the oils out of the tube, the Winsor Newton stuff, I just can't use that. And maybe we had to sort of see this happen to ourselves, because some people then, well, maybe your natural thing is to just say, well, gee, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't this work for me? This other guy worked great for them. What's going on with me? I must be doing something wrong. And I guess we all sort of default to that. Well, I must be doing something wrong because it's just not working for me. And sometimes other people will say that, was that the user error or something like that? People go to the user error real quick. It's not always the case. Sometimes there are mitigating circumstances to that. And then sometimes you just got to give yourself just a break. Give yourself some slack. We're all our own worst critics anyways. That we're always terrified about what other people are going to say. You kind of hold your breath as you wait for people's reactions to things, and they're pretty much almost always universally positive. But what's our first reaction is usually to say we don't like it, didn't come out the way we wanted. It's the expectation game. We talked about managing that earlier on. And I know I'm not necessarily talking about what I'm doing here, but I try to emphasize this point at least once during every video or lesson or whatever. Now here, this is important. So on this side of the rust over here, I'm leaving some of that dark stuff behind. I can't just annihilate it completely. I want to leave some of that behind. So here's a little bit of that rust up here, but like I said, I don't want to go too crazy with it, because too much can be too much, and it becomes too much lightning fast. I mean, really, really fast. So here, let's drop a few more shots of that in a couple other places here. And before we mess around with it too much, let's just leave it go. All right, we'll set him aside. Go back to our base, which is now dry. Yeah, it's dry enough for us to start playing with again, and just going to start grabbing some of this other stuff I've got around here. Just palette sludge almost at this point. Look at that. There's a fun little color in there. Watch this. Look at that. Smearing that all around. Hey, it's transparent. Why the heck not? Here's a little bit of black in there to make it a little less yellow. Look at this. We're just... See, I'm scumbling the paint in there, and then, oh, look at, we're going to push it around with our fingers some more. I made a point, actually, in between the last segment and this one, to check out, and I'm just going to pronounce it as Bohuns. I'm sure most everybody has seen his stuff, and that's, I guess, the person who really, really is known for the stippling type stuff, the makeup brushes and all that. And I went through his Instagram page, pretty much looked at every single picture that was on there. And it's interesting because that, in many ways, was similar to the original shaded base coat that I was doing. But it's an awful lot like this. Oh, here. This is kind of what we're talking about here. We're basically sort of stippling this, and he pushes it around with his fingers too. There, we're going to grab a little bit of our faded ultramarine in here. Like I say, I'm using the brush on its side here. We're just really scumbling this in. This is what he's doing. Now, where else can we do something like this? We can do this with oils. We can do this all day and every day on Sunday. And that is why the rest of this month, well, what's left of this and in January and such, I really want to get back into oils. I really, really do. I mean, if anything else, I miss them. I love them. And I think now I have some projects that are just ideal for those. The original stuff that I was going to do in oils, well, that changed when the whole situation happened with the Song Ice and Fire stuff. So if you're wondering, that's a big reason why the oils thing kind of changed. Look at this. See where? Look at that. Just mix that together with my finger. That's nice, and that's pretty darn smooth for just literally taking my finger and pushing that around. But with oils, oils are just, they love it. They are made for doing just that sort of thing. So I cannot wait, like I said, to get back in my oil. Let's get ourselves a bit of darker mode here on this part of the little stair steps here. The part of the rationale behind the bases was to have almost like an Angkor Wat type theme, and I really, really tried. It's all about these stair step things like this, only there would be about 6-7 layers of this pattern, which would be fantastic if it was just a person on foot. But for snakes, especially of this size, and we're talking about, well, in effect, a very wide footprint, it just didn't work so well. So here we're going now back to the more translucent mode. Look at that. Just scumbling that around. Now we'll go back around the other way. Where are we at here? Just want to make sure you can see what's going on. Look at that. So we're using the side of the brush there. Side of the brush. Now it's a little wet into wet. We're gonna push it around with our finger here. Look at this. See how fun that is? I mean, is this not a blast? And as I said, with oils, it becomes effectively that much easier a task. Now, in the last little bit of this here, what I'm going to do... Here, let's get some darker. Look at that. Now that's so many different colors in our base there. Now, of course, the snake's going to cover up a whole bunch of this. But look, we're just scumbling and pushing paint around. And that's so much fun. And now it looks much more like ancient stone. And it only took us a few minutes. So from here, this is again something I would normally do with, say, the brown liner especially. But I'm going to get a little more transparent black out here. And for our piece de resistance here, we are going to create ourselves some of those cracks. And let's try and find a natural place like here where the stone is already broken. Paint this out here. It's a bit like painting a tree. Branches of a tree sort of spidering out. It's fun too sometimes. Look at that, just connect. It's almost a little bit like marble in a way. Painting the cracks can be very zen. Doesn't have to be stressful. It can also be too much. It's another one of those things where too much, it can be too much. Sometimes it's fun to do this too, where the crack sort of connects in places. It's a little bit thicker in some areas. Maybe part of it is actually chipped out. Can do one like that. And then we're using a big old brush. Big old brush. Lighter version. I'm gonna go with the white into here. Do have to get some water into that though. And now, and this is something that it's best to err on the side of it being a little bit darker at first. You can always lighten it. that's an easier process when you're doing, see this highlighting of the little breaks here, little cracks. Gives it a little bit of dimension. We could have carved these in. You've seen me do it before in previous basing episodes, but here, for whatever reason, I thought it would be just, sometimes it's fun to paint these things in, believe it or not. It is actually more fun, and sometimes they can almost look more realistic. Also, too, because they've got so much greenery that's going on this. Taking that extra time to carve cracks and only to cover those up with the whatever flock or whatever material like that, it's just, you get frustrated. So there, see, it doesn't take a whole bunch of time. Let's get ourselves, now I am going to just put some regular old actual non-transparent black here on my edge. That, because you can see, look at that, is actually transparent black. You can still see through that a little bit. So yes, the transparents are indeed transparent. Who'd have thought? We'll work up our edge here. So what I will do from this point here, since we are already over the 2-hour mark, and like I said, this wasn't supposed to be about basing or adding foliage or anything like that. This was more about finding another way to translate. It's another language for you to be able to speak. The language of ProAcrylTransparent. And like, if you know the Secret Weapon weathering paints, if you know the Reaper paints, the clear inliners, you have a second language now. You have a second language. And we're going to do the same thing, obviously continuing with the Green Stuff World paints on the Harad. Again, learning another language. See how we sort of darken this down? It's almost like we're staining it a bit. Yeah, look at that. Very fun. Not very hard. Not very hard. Not at all. Now this, just real quick, I do see something here that does warrant something like this. Yeah. Okay. Bingo. There we go. So what I will do now is get my greenery on this, get my figure on this, and get some pictures for you. As always, thanks to everybody that supports these, the basing level and on the Army Painter level too. It would not be able to do these. I was just explaining to some of my family earlier today what we do with a lot of these tutorials and what they mean for folks as far as helping them along with their projects and such. Just giving them more tools to work with. So there we go. Yeah, well, most of you guys that, well, all of you guys that see the basing thing, you also end up seeing the dark sword stuff because, hey, there's a lot of basing involved with those too. You know that. So I'll catch you on the next On the Workbench session. You want to subscribe, to the YouTube channel itself and get notifications when we're going to do those live sessions. Those are always fun. But in the meantime, here's your snake, and there's your base. I'll catch you. Actually, this was episode 28, so I'll catch you on episode 29.